and gentlemen, please welcome the host of the Injured List podcast, Brian Scott.
Ladies and gentlemen, what's up? Our first live podcast recording here, live stream on YouTube, Twitter, or X, however you want to call it. Facebook, we are on live. It's a podcast, but we're streaming it also. And I've got one of my talented cohorts, colleagues in the house to help me out here along the way and to discuss some injury stuff from this past season here as we near the end. Mr. Andrew Leduc, he's the host of his own podcast show called Divots and Pivots, also one of our fantasy sports core writers. Mr. Andrew Leduc, welcome to the stage, sir.
Thank you for having me on. It feels like it's been a long time coming to finally get on the air with you.
It is. It's been a long time. Well, last time we saw each other was down in, or I should say up in Ohio, over in Ohio, if you will, for you.
Yes.
Coming from the East Coast there, when we were at the Fantasy Football Expo in Canton, Ohio, which was a blast. And
yes.
Fantasy Sports Core was representing pretty good at that get-together. So we look forward to doing that again next year. So if any of you guys attend, please come looking for us. We'll be happy to shoot the, as we normally do. And we've got a lot to talk about for this episode. So I'm kind of excited. I actually screwed up the intro because, I don't normally do live stuff. I was going to run a promo, but we'll get to that later because I totally botched that. We've got some sponsors for the show that we want to give a shout out to, and we'll make sure we get those commercial spots run. SeatGeek, number one. I'm a brand ambassador for them, so we've got a discount code for those of you looking to get tickets to your next great event. And then the Underdog Fantasy. We've got a Fantasy Sports Core promo code. We've got an Injured List promo code for that as well. They've been sponsoring us as a group for this past year, which has been awesome. So we've got a discount code for that. And, North Carolina is about to legalize online gambling. So I think I might have to take advantage of that promo code myself. I'm excited, and I'm going to be having to pay attention to everybody else's show a lot more now, as especially the gambling stuff. I have no idea what I'm doing when it comes to that.
You're going to become very valuable, though, for the gambling stuff.
I know. That's what I'm hoping.
Yeah.
I'm hoping so.
It's going to be big
we'll
news
have
for
to
you.
See. Yeah.
Those are the edges.
Sure.
I found, especially playing, I don't really play DraftKings basketball, NBA basketball anymore, but when I was first messing around with DraftKings, I played a lot of tiers and NBA lineups because they just always had free ones and stuff. And that's where I found that injuries were so beneficial to know at the last minute because you could slide in the exact replacement and get 3/4 of the production.
Yeah, and if you guys follow some of the other Fantasy Sports Core shows, we do got some guys that really cover the gambling side of things. TSS does a great job with that. They've got some guests on that regularly throughout the week that come on and talk about some gambling information and strategies, which is awesome. We don't really touch upon that much in our blog, which is why I have Andrew here, because Andrew and I both co-write the Inside the Medical Tent blog. And if you guys have not subscribed to that or taken a read of that, I highly recommend it. This year, we have moved to a subscription platform. First time we've done that. We actually waited a few weeks before we initiated that because we had some really good positive feedback. A lot of people were reading it. And, it takes a lot of time for us to put that stuff together. We have to coordinate that on the back end. We both got full-time jobs. So for a small nominal fee, we are now offering that blog as a subscription-based plan on my website, theinjuredlist.com, which you can check out. And that'll be, again, in effect next year. We're going to, upgrade and keep it coming, but bigger and better than before. Each year that we've done it, this is now going to be, next year will be the third year that we've actually done it together. The year and a half prior was a free thing that we kind of just threw together last minute, but it's been really valuable for a lot of people. I've gotten some great feedback, as has Andrew. And I come at that blog giving you the injury information. Andrew asked the questions. And then he goes into some fantasy strategies for you guys to help you with your roster management in the face of injured athletes. So it works great for both of us because we get to do what we do, and you guys get to benefit from the information, and hopefully win yourself a fantasy championship. Andrew, anything about the blog that you would recommend, or that you foresee in the future that maybe down the pipeline here?
At least from my standpoint, even more in depth to the numbers, excuse me, to back up my reasons as to why the fantasy implications make sense and why you should be picking up or trading away or doing whatever roster moves you need to do to react to injuries. I'm gonna get even more in depth for all the subscribers next season.
Yeah, and we're gonna try and expand the list. We've usually done about, I don't know, maybe 3-4 players, sometimes 5 depending on the week. Yeah, depending on the week, obviously, depending on the severity of the injury and the player and how that may affect fantasy rosters throughout the fantasy world. So it kind of varies, but on average, anywhere between 4 to 5. And then every now and then, we'll even do a special blog where we kind of do a little special information. One that we did this past season had to deal with how I go about breaking down and doing my injury analysis, and then how Andrew goes about doing his fantasy analysis. So a little bit behind the scenes kind of information there about how we go about doing our thing. So that was kind of cool. I also did one on the preseason. We did 2 preseason ones, which were free and available to anybody. And you can bet that we'll do that again this season as well. A lot of stuff coming into the preseason next year for sure, as we will get to in just a minute here with our list of players. And actually, that's probably a good segue. Maybe we should dive into that first.
Let's do it.
There were many names that repeatedly popped up on Inside the Medical Tent blog, and a lot of players that I was routinely asked to comment on about their injury status and what I thought was going on with them and what I thought their availability might be, as well as how I thought they might perform. And so I compiled a list, and Andrew, you compiled a list. Andrew, who do you have on your list? And then we'll take a look at mine and see how we compare.
Well, I'm going to start off with the golden boy, the gift that just kept giving, the low-hanging the low-hanging fruit that was the Aaron Rodgers saga this year. That was just from the week one. I think he made about 4 or 5 blogs.
Oh, he was on there quite a bit.
Which is outrageous considering he's still only played 4 snaps for the season.
Correct.
So Aaron Rodgers and his Achilles and that fiasco, that made quite a bit. But I also had Devon Achane, however you say his name. I believe it's Devon Achane. I've been saying it wrong all year. Between his ankle and his knee, he was on. I noticed a lot. Travis Kelce surprisingly made it into a few as well. Deebo Samuel, Daniel Jones, and Keenan Allen were kind of the main guys I saw that were the repeat offenders, if you so want to say.
Okay. Yeah, I pretty much got the same group of people. The only one I did not have on there, and that's only because I put them on a different list, which were the season-ending list.
Yes,
was Daniel Jones, Keenan Allen. But yeah, I had Mike Evans. I felt like he always popped up at some point in time on our blog and other shows within Fantasy Sports Core as well. Austin Eckler, I feel like he always kind of popped up to some degree. I did have Keenan Allen on this list as well, like you did, and I did have Deebo on this list as well. I also had Devon Achane on this list as well. Justin Jefferson I had on there only because he was dealing with a hamstring injury that kept him out for several weeks.
Sure.
Michael Thomas I had on there only because we dealt with him so much last year. I was hoping not to have to even mention his name this year, and yet he still made it on the blog.
I'm still not convinced he's even injured, but okay.
Yeah, who knows? I did have to put Cooper Kupp on that list. He had some nagging stuff that popped up throughout the season. He made it on there a couple of times. Christian Watson I had on there as well. Honorable mention went to a couple players as well. Jonathan Taylor, just because of the fiasco at the beginning of the year with his ankle and their contract situation and how that played out. Toward the end of the season, Chris Olave made a few appearances. The running backs for the Green Bay Packers, Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon, were on there for quite a bit.
Yeah.
And these guys kind of fall into it well. Raheem Mostert was another one, but he's been on everyone's radar with injuries for his entire career so far. Yeah. So that's not a surprise. And then there were 2 guys that were coming off of injuries that I was often asked about, and we did mention quite a bit, and that was Kyler Murray and Breece Hall.
Yes,
And
yes.
Kyler Murray more because we were all kind of wondering when he was going to be back and how effective he was going to be. And Breece Hall because we were all excited that he was back so quickly and how effective he was going to be. So kind of two ends of the spectrum there with ACL injuries and surgeries. But yeah, so we kind of see pretty eye to eye on that. Of anybody in that list, is there anybody that you think you still have lingering questions on, or you think people might still have some lingering questions about?
I mean, I know for me, Keenan Allen is someone that always ends up on my teams, and the fact that he just consistently at this point of his career seems like he is always somewhat in doubt. It's one of those guys that I now continue to have questions on his stability, and is it even worth the headache of having him on my team? Now, look, while he was healthy this year, was a stud, was proving me wrong, and he was throwing up amazing numbers on the year. But at some point, as it always does, he then faltered because of injuries, and you didn't know if he was playing, and you'd find out last minute. It's something that it was hard to prepare for. That's the balance that I always struggle with is, and what factor do you factor in someone's injury history, and is the headache worth it? Because it could make or break your week to week if you don't act fast enough.
Yeah, and I always am taking that into consideration when I'm giving my analysis. I'm always looking at the player as an individual and what their injury history is. I don't necessarily dive too deep into the numbers and statistics about how many games they've actually missed, how much time they've missed because of injuries and stuff like that. But I certainly do pull up in my memory bank seasons past and injuries past and things like that. And that becomes really challenging for me. Especially when you're talking about a guy like Deebo Samuel. Because unlike Keenan Allen, who's dealt with kind of two major issues over the last couple of years, his hamstring from last year, and then this year was like a knee thing that he was dealing with. You got a guy like Deebo.
And he had weird, there was more like chronic injuries with him,
correct.
It seems like.
Correct. I apologize. It was a heel because there was two heels. Marquise Brown was also dealing with a heel issue. But Deebo is a guy that always pops up on there with something. And it's never like the same thing twice. So that becomes even more challenging because then you're like, well, is this something that's really serious? Is this just a kind of a bump in the bruise kind of thing where he's going to get over it? And, Deebo doesn't miss much time despite these injuries. So it becomes really hard to predict whether he is going to miss time, if he's going to be back out there, how effective he'll be. So those guys are really hard to kind of predict. But I feel like the upside on them is a lot greater than a guy like Keenan Allen, unfortunately. And especially as they get further into their career. Because unfortunately, with the skilled position players, wide receiver, running back, you don't age gracefully in the NFL.
No, it's a big drop-off.
Yeah, it's a big drop-off. In fact, once you get past year 3, you've already exceeded most expectations, as the NFL career on average doesn't last past year 3. So considering nowadays these guys are playing, 6-7 years, sometimes even longer at that skilled position players, it's pretty remarkable that they can keep doing what they're doing and still be very productive. So I tend to kind of steer toward the younger players at skilled positions, especially any ones who've had high upside, high ceiling, and potentially healthy college careers. And that's one of the reasons why we do the NFL, or why I do the NFL combine preseason injury analysis, because we delve into a lot of the rookies coming to the league and what kind of collegiate injury history they have, and that's something to be worried about.
Was it Devon Achane who you had called out early on in the season when he first got hurt that it was the same knee injury that he had in college? Like, I believe it was him that you went all the way back to college. I might be wrong on the player, but there was someone I remember in the blog you went all the way back to talking about this is the same thing that happened to him in college. He recovered nicely, but it's the second time, so who knows kind of thing.
So Nick Chubb was one of those guys.
Oh, that's right. It was Nick Chubb when he's ended his season. That's correct. Yes.
Correct. Yeah, we'll get to him in a minute. But there are guys that do pop up like that on the preseason injury analysis that I do. And so, those are definitely guys to be wary of. Brandon Ayuk popped up on my analysis a couple of years ago before coming into the league. For the most part, he's been pretty healthy. Yeah. There have been a couple other players that have popped up on there and that have been able to have good, solid NFL careers with no major injuries. Zach Moss was one guy that popped up on my pre-injury NFL draft analysis. So, he's dealt with some stuff over the years, missed some time recently with a forearm injury. had I think an ankle or something issue last year. He's always kind of on the injured list and in and out of games too. But Brees Hall, I wanted to mention just because he was a guy coming into the league I had no kind of reservations about, and then unfortunately for him last year tore his ACL. So that was kind of a surprise, but something that can happen too.
And the type of injury that'll either linger for years or cause other issues to linger for years. It's kind of the slippery slope.
Correct, and I have to hand it to the Jets. I think they handled that injury and that recovery very well. There was no rush per se to get him back, even though he was technically cleared at the beginning of the season. They kind of took him along slow, which I think was the right move. And if you noticed over the last few weeks, he actually got better and better as time went on, and had some really big performances toward the end of the year, which is what you would expect and want to see with a guy coming off an ACL injury. As you get closer to that 2-year mark is when they really make their significant kind of final improvement and recovery. So perfect timing for him. I think he'll come in the next season better than he was this year, and I think we'll see him at the peak of his game. And he's got youth on his side, which also is a tremendous advantage.
Well, we also have a healthy Aaron Rodgers too. I think that's a big reason why the Jets ended up, luckily playing it right. Is once Aaron Rodgers goes down after 4 plays, the writing was pretty much on the wall for them. And like you said, good for them for recognizing that and successfully evaluating, because at that point there was no point to rush Brees Hall back. It was really a play for the future because they knew their season was pretty much shot.
Right, exactly. And they did a good job of that. Now, let's talk about some of these guys that had the season-ending stuff.
Yes.
Because I've got 11 guys on my list. You've got 8. Well, let's hear the guys you have, and let's make sure I didn't miss anybody and vice versa.
So funny enough, I didn't actually write their names down. I just counted them out. But obviously Nick Chubb was on there. And I'm honestly blanking on the rest because I didn't write them down.
Okay. So I'll go through mine.
You run with the names, and we'll talk about them.
So along with Nick Chubb, we've got J.K. Dobbins.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll talk about him. We got Aaron Rodgers, obviously.
Yeah.
We've got Anthony Richardson. Unfortunately, we've got Joe Burrow. Unfortunately, we've got Mike Williams.
Yeah,
unfortunately, we've got Justin Herbert.
Actually, I didn't count him because it was so much later in the season. But
and I'll give you that one. We can probably cross him off, but still something that we should look into for next year. So that's kind of why I put him on there. You got Deshaun Watson with his shoulder, Cam Akers, Kirk Cousins, and Daniel Jones.
Yeah, both of those Viking guys are the ones I forgot: Cam Akers and Kirk Cousins. I don't know how I forgot to count them, but yes.
The crappy thing for Kirk Cousins really is his age.
His age, and unfortunately that situation in Minnesota, he's not guaranteed a job next year, unfortunately now.
Correct. And then also it's his back plant leg, which doesn't bode well, unlike Aaron Rodgers, who was actually his lead leg. His injury didn't happen the same way that Kirk Cousins did. So that's something you always have to keep in the back of your mind too. So that's going to be a tough kind of bounce back for him mentally and physically. And then, like you said, with the contractual thing developing there in Minnesota, he's probably going to be donning a new uniform next year.
That's what 100% I fully agree on that. And the Cam Akers part, honestly, that was so, non-factor for me, unfortunately. I thought maybe going to Minnesota when he first went there, I thought that might be a new light for him. And he was just so underutilized and in some regards disrespected in LA, but it just didn't. I don't think it was going to turn out in the end, even though Alexander Mattison was a disappointment and the door was wide open for him. Unfortunately, he just got hurt.
One of the big reasons why I put Cam Akers on this list, because I'm not really so sure he's going to be fantasy relevant anymore after this.
Yes, agreed.
Because of the fact that he was the guy often referred to as the one who came back within 4 months from his Achilles rupture 2 years ago.
That's true.
That was on the opposite side, keep in mind. So this is a new Achilles rupture on the other side. His surgeon was Dr. Neil Elatrosh, the same surgeon who did Aaron Rodgers' surgery. So I'm kind of curious to see how all this goes, how all this plays out. Will Cam Akers make a quick recovery like he did the first time around? Highly doubt it. Will Aaron Rodgers play as well and feel as good as Cam Akers did? coming off that first Achilles rupture that he had that was fixed and made him back in 4 months.
Because Akers did look good coming off that first one. Surprisingly, it was pretty remarkable. But I agree. I think he'll still be on a team, but I don't think he's going to be a guy that's going to be on a lot of rosters going forward.
Yeah. Another guy dealing with an Achilles injury was J.K. Dobbins. And unfortunately, this came after he made it back from an ACL issue that he dealt with all of last year. Mm-hmm. And he was a guy we talked about a lot last year because there was he wasn't able to really bounce back very quick. He came into preseason not really ready. He ended up having to miss several weeks because had his knee scoped again.
Yep.
Him and Gus Edwards were both dealing with this around the same time. The Ravens running back position was really banged up. Mm-hmm. Fast forward to this year, he comes in healthy, he comes in ready to go, and then boom, he ruptures his Achilles after dealing with this ACL. And it's not the first time in recent memory that we've seen this. We've seen several high-profile athletes coming back from ACL injuries who've then gone on and tore their Achilles either on the same side or the opposite side. And one guy that I always go back to is Klay Thompson of the Golden State Warriors. Famously ruptured his ACL in the bubble or whatever it was, or the year before the bubble. And then during his recovery, as he was training, ruptured his Achilles, ended up missing like almost 2 years total by the time it was all said and done. Came back, had a good year last year. Hasn't quite looked the same this year.
Yeah.
And I know I'm using basketball to kind of make the analogy here, but the point of it is you do lose a lot of explosiveness and a lot of power. And in the NFL, that's probably no more important aside from basketball with your Achilles at the running back position. So I'm curious to hear what you think about this as far as fantasy relevancy goes.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's the perfect storm for J.K. Dobbins to be yet another Baltimore running back that just disappears. Because I don't think J.K. Dobbins if he were to go to another team, I don't think he is a thing anymore. I think he's unfortunately in the community. It's now been an unfortunate burning of way too many fantasy managers who hype him up and then get disappointed because of an injury. And plus, if he stays in Baltimore, in that Baltimore backfield with the emergence of Keaton Mitchell and the now what seems to be the stableness of Gus Edwards as a number 2 back, I just don't see his spot in Baltimore at this point. So there's really no win situation in my eyes for J.K. Dobbins. I was low on him coming into the season, and I'm going to continue to be low on him. I'm going to be even lower now, though.
Yeah, good points there. And the Keaton Mitchell, right?
Yeah.
He was a guy that a lot of people asked me about because he had some issues in college with injuries as well.
Okay,
and I think he might have even come into the preseason coming off an injury late in the collegiate season the year before. So, but kudos to him. He got himself healthy and made a good took a good advantage of the situation that presented itself to him. So, looks like he should be in a good position heading into next season. Guys who are not in a good position are the other guys on this list. And, speaking of J.K. Dobbins coming off that ACL injury, you've got Mike Williams and Daniel Jones both dealing with ACL injuries. The big difference between these two guys, aside from the positions they play, is the timing of their injuries.
Yes.
Daniel Jones happened quite late, especially compared to Mike Williams. So that's going to be huge as we come into next season. Now, there's no reason to think that Daniel Jones can't be ready, but it's going to be getting close. And it's going to be a nail biter and it really kind of up in the air as to whether he will be starting week 1 for the Giants. Whereas Mike Williams, by all intents and purposes, should be able to get himself right and get himself ready in the preseason and good to go. So we'll have to see how both of those guys play out. From a fantasy perspective, Mike Williams has always been a pretty big catch, no pun intended, on your roster. What do you feel about him heading into next year?
This just seems to be the continuing story with Mike Williams every year, unfortunately, that he suffers some sort of injury where even if it's not season ending, he's missing a pretty decent chunk of time. And unfortunately, in being the number 2 guy to Keenan Allen, who, to be fair, we mentioned is also now having his own injury issues. Just that receiving core as a whole seems to be wide open in all the wrong ways. Mike Williams, now 29, will be 30 for next season with multiple injuries under his belt. I think it's fair to question how much he's got left in him. You could make the argument that because of the injuries, he doesn't have as much wear on the tires, but it still takes its toll. The one positive thing that he does have going for him is, like I said, Keenan Allen also injury bug. Quentin Johnston, at least in his rookie season here, has not panned out the way that they hoped. So technically, he's really still only competing with guys like Jalen Guyton and Joshua Palmer, who Joshua Palmer is seeming to be the somewhat more stable, lower ceiling, safer bet when it comes to that receiving core. Once again, though, as long as he's healthy, and I think that's what people keep forgetting about Justin Herbert here. Yes, he's got his own injury now. We're going to get to that, as you mentioned. But when he's been healthy, people were really down on him this year, and as a disappointing season. And I get it; the stats can't lie, and the win losses can't lie. But he also didn't have Austin Eckler periodically. He didn't have his normal receivers, and even when those receivers were out there, they were out there because they needed bodies out there, so they weren't at 100%. Plus, with the downgrading fashion of offensive lines in the across the league right now, he's under more pressure, like every other quarterback is.
Yeah,
these are all factors that are now playing into Justin Herbert. Depending on the news we get in the offseason here about Herbert's injury, I am going to be a massive, supporter of buying low on him in Dynasty and also drafting him at a steal potentially in redraft leagues going into draft season next year.
And let's make no mistake, Josh Palmer did pop up on our injury reports from time to time. Maybe not on our blog, but I was asked a lot about him throughout the weeks on some other shows like TSS Fantasy and with Dan Mader on MD's Fantasy Football. Now, moving forward, I like Mike Williams' chances of getting healthy and remaining healthy next year, but like you said, that's an issue. I did have Quentin Johnston on a couple of my rosters. I was hoping for bigger things from him. I feel like he didn't get utilized enough as a wide receiver one when the opportunity was there. Maybe we'll see some bigger things from him next year. He's got the frame. He's got the skills. Maybe just not utilized properly.
Like I said, I think the utilization can go back to just that whole offense just being in absolute shambles. Getting rid of Brandon Staley was a positive direction for that offense. But the other issue that he had is he just wasn't getting open. Yeah, he has the frame. Yeah, he's got the skill set, the athleticism, but he wasn't using it in the proper ways to get separation, which unfortunately, like I said, because of the time that Herbert was getting to throw, because of the lack of options, unfortunately had to get open pretty quickly. Or at least give a somewhat bigger window for Herbert to have success. And it just wasn't lining up this year for anything the Chargers were doing in that passing game.
And speaking of Herbert, he's dealing with his own issue. Like you mentioned, he's fractured his index finger on his throwing hand, which is not the finger you want to fracture on your throwing hand. I'd probably say that finger and your thumb are probably two of the most important when it comes to throwing a football. And he went for the index, spared the thumb, which some other quarterbacks had to deal with. But so off-season, not even off-season. He had surgery already, I think end of November. We're not going to see him probably for a while. I think we'll see him ready for the preseason. I don't think we'll see him do much in the off-season as far as throwing and stuff. He'll do a lot of rehab. But I do think, given the resources and stuff they have in the NFL, when it comes to these hand and finger injuries, guys do pretty well. Yeah. In the general population, this is a lot different. Finger injuries, especially fractures like this that require surgery, can often be really difficult to bounce back from. It's easy for a finger to get very stiff and very swollen after surgery. You really have to be able to baby it and treat it appropriately and get the swelling down so that you can initiate the rehab once appropriately able to do so. And I speak from experience with this, not only from myself, my wife too. She was a certified occupational and hand therapist, so she's treated a lot of this, and she's worked with a lot of orthopedic patients who've dealt with hand and finger injuries, and they are really challenging to recoup from. So I expect that he'll have a vigorous off-season rehab program. I don't think we'll see him throw for quite some time, but I think he'll be able to get this ready in the preseason. And hopefully not have this kind of linger or cause any major issues throwing a ball next year.
Two quick, I guess, more in-depth questions about the finger injury for him that I have is that one is the injury and the surgery. Is that something that can lead to more chronic things like early arthritis or like chronic things that he's now just going to have to play through, like with some level of discomfort? And two, is there any worry that he's now going to have to throw the ball a little differently to accommodate for whatever his hand feels like in the future?
Yeah, so great questions, especially on the mechanics one. The other one, I can't really give you a specific answer. It really depends on the type of injury that he had. I believe they reported it as a fracture. Now, that really depends on where the fracture was and what type of fracture it was and how they fixed it, whether it be with hardware or some type of soft tissue repair. Did they pin it and then remove the pin, or is there permanent hardware like a screw placed? That really differs as far as the recovery for a couple of reasons. One, if it was simply fixed with a pin, where they basically drive a wire into the finger to stabilize everything and give it time to heal, then the recovery is usually a lot, I wouldn't say better, but easier, I think, because it's not as invasive a procedure at all. There's really no dissection that has to happen. And once the wire comes out, you can start getting them moving again. Swelling isn't nearly as bad usually. If they had to actually open the finger up and actually physically put a screw into the bone or whatever to fix it, then that's a little bit more challenging to bounce back from. And I think based on what they had to do, that will lead to whether or not he does change his mechanics. And that's why the rehab's so important, and not letting him throw a ball so quickly is because you start throwing the ball too soon, and that's when guys start making changes and start trying to adapt to how they're feeling. So until he feels right or close to 100%, I don't think you should be picking up a ball, especially a football, and throwing full velocity, because if he starts changing his mechanics, that's when you start developing elbow issues, shoulder issues. And we see that a lot in baseball, not as much in football, but that can certainly be the case.
Makes sense to me.
And so, keeping right in line with the quarterbacks, and for some reason their upper extremity injuries. One that caught me by surprise, and I think it caught a lot of people by surprise, was the whole Joe Burrow situation. Yeah. Unfortunately for him, he was dealing with a calf strain that happened in the preseason. That was like the big question on everyone's radar. Everybody wanted to know how he was going to do, how effective he will be, when could we expect him back. And I spent a lot of time researching that and updating everybody on that. And then fast forward to just a few weeks ago, and he's got a wrist injury. Didn't seem like it was anything serious. And then all of a sudden we hear he's out for the remainder of the year. He's having a ligament repaired in his wrist and season-ending surgery. And I was kind of shocked.
And I believe that news came out like right after we dropped the article too, didn't it?
Correct.
So which we didn't even mention the wrist injury in the article. It was like...
Yeah, and that's not the first time that's happened, and we do apologize for that. But we are on a tight timeline here.
But I'm saying that's how surprised it was on nobody's radar. It just kind of happened.
Yeah, and so I couldn't even tell you what the injury is. I have a few thoughts and speculations. When you hear wrist and ligament, the one that comes to mind is called the TFCC. Mm-hmm. It's actually not so much a ligament as much as it is a piece of cartilage, but it's often injured and can be torn and repaired. One of the more common wrist things that you see. Outside of that, I'm not really sure what else it could have been. Yeah, there's a bunch of little ligaments in and around the wrist and some of the bones and joints in the wrist. But the more common stuff is usually that TFCC ligament sprain / injury. And that's on the outer part of the wrist. So I could see that being a problem, like when you're throwing, because you're kind of following through with that motion, and that can compress that part. So maybe that's what it was. And that's like, listen, it's significant enough. You're in enough pain. We should just shut it down and fix this so that this doesn't carry over into next year and linger all off season. I mean, I don't know. I don't know what else it could have been. It really, I really have no idea.
Which happens sometimes. Like we said, some things just surprise us. Yeah. So the Joe Burrow one was disappointing for sure, especially with it just being something completely out of nowhere. But credit to the Bengals for flipping the script and running with the punches and still leaving themselves a chance in all this with Jake Browning. That's honestly, it's a credit to Joe Burrow for the communication I'm assuming he has with Jake Browning to keep him prepared for these games. So that's I think it's just a credit to really shows how far the Bengals organization has come as a whole over the years.
Yeah. Curious to see how this plays out as this preseason or off-season kind of unwinds here and gets going. Whether or not he's at the open practices and whether or not he's back for the start of preseason. We'll have to kind of see. I'm going to use this opportunity before we kind of transition to our next athlete. We got a couple quarterbacks, and they're all upper extremity stuff, with the exception of Aaron Rodgers, who I'm not even sure we're going to mention anymore because I'm so sick and tired of talking about him. We're going to hear from our sponsors real quick. I've got 2 commercial breaks, and then we'll be back to the Injured List podcast with Andrew Leduc.
Fantasy Sports Corp and Underdog Fantasy have teamed up to start your fantasy season off in the win column with Best Ball. What is Best Ball? It's quite simply the easiest way to win. No team management, no trades, no waivers. It's their biggest contest ever and it has only gotten bigger. You simply have to sit and win. You don't even have to set your lineup. Always get your best score every week. Just enter a contest, draft your team, and Underdog will do the rest. What could make this even better? How about free money, up to $100 using our exclusive promo code? Go online now and use the promo code InjuredList to double your deposit up to $100. You tell them Gingerbread sent you. Good girl.
Special shout out to today's episode to SeatGeek. We recently partnered with them to become a brand ambassador. What does that mean? Well, for you, it means you get a special discount when you make your first ticket purchase with SeatGeek. With my code, InjuredListPod, you will get $20 off your first purchase with SeatGeek. SeatGeek is a ticket purchasing app that takes all the confusion out of buying tickets to your favorite sports, concert events, and more. They score each ticket on a scale of 1 to 10 to help you know if you're getting a good deal. Green is good, red is bad. My followers get $20 off their first ticket purchase using my code, InjuredListPod. Click on the link in the show notes and browse for your favorite events. Your next big night ever is waiting, and they have the tickets. All right. Quick little message there from our sponsors. Thank you guys for that. Thanks for sticking with us here on the Injured List podcast, a live podcast streaming episode. I've never done this before. I'm having a good time. I hope you guys are getting a lot of useful information out of this.
I'm glad I could be here for you to pop your live cherry.
Thank you. It's going way better than I thought. In fact, it's been painless thus far, which is really important. And I'm drinking a beer to help kind of ease my nerves, and it's in a very fancy glass because I can't find my freaking pint glasses anywhere. So I got this fancy looking crystal.
I noticed that wasn't lost on me. That glass was quite swanky.
It's more like a chalice. Actually.
There you go.
We'll call it that. So we left off talking about quarterbacks. We touched base on Joe Burrow's wrist injury, but he's not the only quarterback that lost the season. He's not the only quarterback that lost the season to an upper extremity injury, which is kind of weird. Usually they're getting tackled and their knees or ankles are blown out, but it seemed like there was a upper extremity year too. Anthony Richardson went down pretty early in the season with a pretty gnarly AC joint injury. And for those of you that don't know, it's that little bump you feel there. Your acromion and your clavicle come together, and there's a joint right there. And when that joint gets injured and those ligaments get torn, your clavicle can go boop and pop up like that. And if it's significant enough, which in his case it was, oftentimes surgery will be advised. And unfortunately, this surgery takes a long time to heal because those ligaments are under so much tension. And when you reconstruct them with the surgery, you have to give those things adequate time to heal. And unfortunately, these surgeries have a fairly high recurrence rate. So he's not quite out of the woods yet. We'll have to see how he does in the off season here. It shouldn't cause any major long-term issues. Now, I don't remember if this was on his throwing shoulder or not, but if it was, that could be of concern because even though the AC joint is not so important in the mechanics of throwing, you'll feel it still. I mean, it can still hurt. And it's certainly going to affect his ability or desire to want to lower his shoulder and make a run. So keep an eye on this as we progress.
and wondering is this the type of injury that will affect or be more likely to re-injure if you're a type of guy like Anthony Richardson who's looking to throw while on the run? Because I feel like when you throw on the run and having to turn your body while moving, I feel like there's an extra element of torque in that upper body motion of, trying to flick the arm like that. Is there a potential for that being more problematic for a guy of his style?
I do believe so. And I say that because I've seen a lot of these injuries. I've also had this injury myself, and mine was much, much lower grade than what his probably was. I didn't need surgery for it, but there isn't more than a few weeks or months that go by where I'm not reminded that I did injure that at one point in my life. And mine was mild. So I can only imagine what a grade 3. I mean, grade 3s hurt. They're funky to look at. Your clavicle sticking up like this. And the surgery is not a fun one to have to go through. It usually requires using like a cadaver or some type of graft tendon where you basically loop it around the bones and have to screw it in and anchor it down with sutures. And it's a big procedure. It's not easy technically to do. And like I said, they have high failure rates when you're looking at other surgeries that we do, which are very good. This one can sometimes not work. So something to certainly keep an eye on. I'm sure he had some of the best doing it, and that's no disrespect to them. I'm sure they've done a great job. But sometimes there's only so much you can control. And this is something that I would certainly keep an eye on in the offseason. I'll be curious to see when he's actually back out there throwing and how he feels when he starts. So we'll have to kind of keep an eye. But, unfortunately, he had a nice looking start to his rookie career. And got shut down pretty early with this. What was it, like week 4, maybe week 5?
That's what I was trying to remember. It was 4 or 5.
Yeah, it was pretty early.
I don't remember the exact. I can find out the exact week for you, but it was one of those 2. I know for sure.
Yeah, and he had hit on our blog a few weeks before that with another injury. I don't know if it was a thumb or something else had happened, and he kind of popped up on our radar. It wasn't anything serious.
Week 5, yeah.
Yeah, and then boom, all of a sudden this happened. So not very unfortunate for him.
Because he didn't play week 3 either.
Yeah, he was dealing with something else though. I think. Yeah.
Yeah, because that's right. Yeah, because it's showing it was week 3. I'm trying to see what that week 3 injury was. It doesn't go back that far because obviously the shoulder took control of the notes at that point.
You'll have to take our word for it.
Yeah.
And then speaking of shoulders and quarterbacks, well, then you had the whole Deshaun Watson thing. And I feel like that also kind of came out of nowhere. He was dealing with a couple of minor issues. Mm-hmm. And then we hear that he had and I'm going to use air quotes here because I'm not exactly sure what happened. They said a fracture of the shoulder that had to be fixed. My theory with that
sounds sketchy, but okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, now there are things that can happen. And my theory on that was that he fractured a part of the glenoid, which is basically the socket part of your shoulder.
Okay.
And that's not good. And it begs the question as why that happened. Did his shoulder try to dislocate or sublux where it pops out and pops back in and that caused the fracture? Because there's really no other way that I'm aware of or mechanically speaking that can cause that. I mean, it would be very rare to have an isolated fracture of the glenoid for no apparent reason other than to possibly dislocate the shoulder or have it like driven back into the socket. So
I would say, could it happen if someone improperly pops the shoulder back in? Like,
yeah, I mean, that's always
like something like that.
It can. But and then I from all the reports and stuff that we've read or heard, we don't really know what part of the shoulder was fractured, if that in fact was it. I'm hard pressed. Now you can also have fractures on the other part of the shoulder, on the ball part, the humerus. Sometimes you can have what's called a tuberosity fracture there. That's concerning too, because that's where the rotator cuff attaches, which is important for throwing. So there's a myriad of things that it could be. Not quite sure. And the whole thing about this is, man, they just shelled out a ton of guaranteed money to this guy. Mm-hmm. And he's coming back off this whole issue with the massage thing and stuff. Unbelievable turn of events here.
Do you think he'll be getting massage treatments for this shoulder?
I jokingly said at the time that he's probably got them all lined up, scheduled in advance. He found out he was having surgery. Oh, man. But, we'll have to see how long he's out of commission with this. If it's significant, he could be shut down from throwing for a while, maybe even months.
Let's be honest.
On what they had to do.
he I mean, I guess I'm looking at his numbers right now because I thought I remembered him not seeming that impressive anyways when he was back, but his actual fantasy points weren't as bad as I remembered them being for some reason. So I guess I'm wrong. So just ignore that thought. Never mind.
Yeah. Well, hindsight's always 20/20.
Yeah.
Who else is on this list that we haven't gotten to yet? As far as quarterbacks go, that was it. I mean, obviously, like we mentioned earlier, Aaron Rodgers with the Achilles.
I feel like we're still missing quarterbacks because I feel like there was
What happened to
I feel like there was so many quarterbacks this year. Geno Smith went down eventually, but he was kind of
and so that brings me to the next segment, which is who did we miss? Who did we leave out? Who were the omissions? Geno Smith missed a bunch of time with various stuff. Baker Mayfield. What happened to Baker?
So Baker Mayfield, I think, was just a factor of he was kind of towards the end of the season, and then he ended up coming back and like being kind of all right. So the Baker Mayfield stuff, I honestly don't even, at that point, I was unfortunately checked out of my fantasy teams because I did so bad this year.
Yeah. Well, I honestly don't even remember if he was even dealing with an injury or if it was just like
it was rib injury. That's why. So he was playing through a rib injury. So that's more what it was. That's why I think that's why he never really fully made the article because I don't know. It was a myriad of things, and also there's guys that I know we left off that had hamstring injuries because something we mentioned last year. There's so many hamstring injuries throughout the year, and they're all the same analysis. We don't know until we see it. And as you say, we don't know until we see them on the practice field on Friday. Yeah. So we don't want to say the same thing over and over week in and week out. So we try to mix it up. So unfortunately, I know a lot of guys are asking, and women are asking questions about guys with hamstring injuries for their lineups, rightfully so. A lot of times you're not going to see that as the season goes on, maybe at the beginning of the season because we talk about the effects of training camp and all that jazz. But as the season goes on, it just becomes, quite frankly, boring. Boring content.
True. So. Yeah, it sucks to be repeating ourselves. We don't like to do that.
Yeah.
We'd like to try and keep each week in the blog fresh and new. So if you don't see us repeatedly put the same guys out there, it's probably because not much has changed, or the reports are out and it's pretty obvious that they're either a go or a sit. So usually we're trying to attack the players where there's a lot of question or uncertainty. And so that's the purpose of the blog. So if you're like, why didn't you include this guy? Or why didn't you put this guy on there? Or how come you don't week to week update us on? It's because there's usually an obvious answer and an obvious decision has been made on their status. We try to focus on the guys where no one's really sure what to expect or what to do. You have questions about what move to make. That's where we come in. And that's what the blog's all about. And,
you know I have to forgot to talk about too that on the show tonight was Jamar Chase and how that the whole we completely forgot of how the season started for Chase, how like the injury flux was like those first few weeks, like he was doing awful. It was because there was like injury concerns. So like that was also a whole big thing that we just completely forgot about. We did talk about it in the blog, but I forgot about that aspect of the season this year until I'm just looking through some past injuries right now.
You know why? It's because like as soon as Joe Burrow went down, all hope was lost with the Cincinnati Bengals and Jamar's performances.
I know. It was brutal.
And then, toward the end of the year here, when he was actually missing some time, it was at that point, a lot of guys' fantasy rosters were kind of jacked up anyway. And
that's true.
But listen, if you guys have questions and you need answers, this is a great way to get them answered. You got to reach out to us. And I make these statements all the time, and I post this stuff on my social media accounts. We're always, Andrew and I are always up to answer questions. We're open to ideas. Shoot us questions, email us, contact us on our social media handles at Injured List Pod, at Real Mr. Mallard on Twitter, Injured List Podcast on Instagram, Facebook, InjuredList.com website. Andrew's got Divots and Pivots, the show. You can find them on Fantasy Sports Core on our website there. There's no reason why you guys can't get in touch with us. We'll be happy to answer questions. And if you subscribe to the blog, which I highly recommend, you'll have direct communication with me for sure, and Andrew as well. So that's a great way as a paying customer that you guys can get more direct answers to the questions you have. And guess what? That's on the DL, man. That's like prime time, top secret, NSA type info right there. That's like... that's like real stuff. So, as we head kind of toward the conclusion of our show, I wanted to basically just kind of critique ourselves and see what we thought, how accurate we were, where we kind of missed the ball, no pun intended, or dropped the ball, where we maybe missed, big time, or where we hit and struck gold. I'll start because I think we were pretty damn accurate overall. I don't know any numbers. I don't look at stats. There's really no way to measure this, but I have to say with the Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, Aaron Rodgers, I think we nailed it. I think we nailed those three guys for sure. Kyler Murray too. I think we were right on the ball with Kyler. Some of these other ones were real kind of hit or miss, but I think we kind of held our own. I think maybe if we had to look back and say who were we really way off on, and this goes to anybody with a hamstring injury. I say Christian Watson was just so up in the air. I couldn't tell you freaking week to week what the hell was going to happen with him.
He was this year's Keenan Allen. Allen it was the same thing.
Exactly. And a lot of other Packers like AJ Dillon and Aaron Jones. I couldn't tell you. I couldn't tell you week to week. I had zero confidence in my predictions about what was going to happen.
But really, you're right. The entire Packers team, because even when Romeo Doubs got injured, like there was just nonstop injuries that we had no clue what was going on. So yeah, sometimes we just lose a feel for, unfortunately, a certain team. It seems.
And Cooper Kupp, last year when he was dealing with the hamstring stuff, that was a lot easier to kind of predict. This year he had some nagging stuff like a high ankle sprain, this sprain, or that sprain. He was kind of all over the map too. I had a hard time telling when he was going to come back, how long he'd be out. That was another tough one.
Yeah, I can tell you a couple of guys I missed on that I had predicted within the blogs that based on injuries, guys who I thought were going to step up and be immediately useful was back early in the season when James Conner got hurt. I was really pushing ringing the bell for Amari DiMercato. That flopped on my face. Elijah Moore, when Amari Cooper was banged up, I thought he was going to explode. That was also kind of a product of the Deshaun Watson stuff and that whole quarterback situation, which once again, the Browns somehow are still having a great season. So good for them for keeping that going. There was one more that I was severely wrong on. I think I was also pushing big that I thought Jameson Williams was actually going to come into the league now healthy and be good. And he had some moments, but for the most part, considering the amount of hype I put on him in the blog from a fantasy standpoint, that was also
that's a great one that you brought up. I'm glad you brought that up because I totally forgot about him, and I was actually very high on him too. And the reason I was because he got injured in the championship game of the college football season, which gave him plenty of time to recover, and it was a quote unquote isolated ACL injury, which made it sound like he was going to have a pretty straightforward recovery and rehab. But then, I should have known better because I've mentioned this before, and I shoot myself in the foot with this because, I told you it takes guys about 2 years off an ACL injury to really bounce back and have that kind of performance or that time where they get out there and they feel like they're as close to 100%. So I don't think we've seen the last of him. I don't think we've actually seen his best stuff yet in the NFL. I look for him to actually step up next year and hopefully do better. I'll take that one. That's an L.
I'm giving him one more year. If he doesn't do something with next year, then I am going to count him as just one of those guys. Like one of those guys. Like, who was the guy in Jacksonville years ago? I always forget his name. Who unfortunately got hurt and then got into legal issues. But who was supposed to be the next big thing? And oh my god, I can't remember his name. He was this real electric guy. If I remember his name, I'm gonna tell you. But he's just the newest version of the big hype star that it was never.
Yeah. There you could probably go down and make a huge list of those guys too.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I don't have really anything else. I think we're almost done here. I think we're about to wrap up.
Yeah, that sounds. As you do that, because now this name is bugging me. I'm going to try to look up that Jacksonville guy. Was it like Blackstone or something?
What a wide receiver?
It's gonna absolutely drive me insane now. It's just one of those things that when I know there's a name in my head somewhere that I can't access, it just drives me absolutely insane.
Well, I'm trying to think of if it was maybe somebody I might have had on my pre-draft injury analysis, and I don't recall anybody.
When I say years ago, I mean like
Oh.
years ago, like the 2010 era.
Oh, yeah,
It was a while
I wasn't
ago.
around then.
I'm not going to find
Jameson
out
Williams
before the
did
end of
make
the
it on
show.
my pre-injury draft analysis, and I'm sure if you listen to that or read that, I did that podcast episode back before the draft. I'm pretty sure that I was very positive on Jameson Williams, so I will take that L. It didn't quite play out like I hoped it would, but I do have a better feeling about him next year because he's entering that kind of 2-year window of time from his ACL injury and surgery. So that historically and statistically seems to be the time that guys will peak and kind of make it back to their as close to their pre-injury level as they will ever probably be. So pay attention to him next year. I think he'll be a much better productive player than he was this year. And having been, listen, just being in the league a second year as a pro, forget about the injuries aside, you're going to see guys perform a lot better, getting used to the routine, getting used to the plays, the calls, how things kind of work in the NFL, the ebb and flow, not just on the field, but off the field too. You can expect a lot of better things from most rookies season 2.
Yeah, it makes sense, and I think that offense is still set up to where he can have success. So I'm rooting for him, rooting for it.
Yep. Well, anyway, so listen, you can follow me at the Injured List Pod on Twitter, injuredlist.com, Injured List Podcast, social media, Twitter, Injured List Pod, Facebook. I have my stuff up here on the top of the screen. You can see. And then, Andrew, where can we follow you and listen to your great content? You got the Divots and Pivots show. It just aired 2 nights ago. Did really well. Nice new format. Yeah. Loved the video quality. All the analysis and stuff was awesome. And I'm not a huge golf guy. I like to play. I don't really follow it as much, but you guys are pretty on point with your stuff. And you guys do a lot of the gambling stuff on the golf side too, right?
We do. Before I forget, Justin Blackman. I just found it. Justin Blackman from Oklahoma State, 2008. I had to get it off my chest.
That's going back away from me. I barely remember yesterday.
Not to blow up my own shout out here, but you can find me at Real Mr. Mallard on Twitter. Search Divots and Pivots both on Twitter, on Facebook. My co-host Bud Copeland at This Buds for You on Instagram, Facebook, all that stuff. He puts out daily videos. And yeah, Divots and Pivots just aired like Brian said 2 nights ago. First week did great. We're about to really kick into the golf season here as we get our first full field tournament next week. So we have fun with it. We love what we talk about. We love all the drama that's going on right now between the PIF and the PGA and LIV and all this jazz. And there's going to be some final results to all that coming very soon, we predict. So tune in on Tuesday nights at 8:00 on Fantasy Sports Corporation. And Twitter and Facebook and all that.
Yeah, and then obviously we'll have a new, bigger, better version of Inside the Medical Tent blog, which you can subscribe to on the injuredlist.com website. Top right corner, you'll see the blog tab. If you just click on that, you can sign up. Cancel anytime. It's a small nominal fee. We charge, I think it's like weekly. And then, once the season's over, it'll end. We usually do at least, I think, 16 weeks. But like I said, you can cancel anytime. Wealth of knowledge coming your way in that blog. Hopefully we'll be able to, not hopefully, I know we will be able to give you a better product next season as we kind of refine our methods and our technique. And, that will be year 3 of us doing this blog together. We started out back at Belly Up Sports. Now we moved over to Fantasy Sports Core. So we're even more involved and even more on point with our stuff. So looking forward to bigger, better things as we head into 2024. Hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, the live stream episode being recorded here. So share it with your friends, replay the video. We'll have it up on the Injured List YouTube site. We'll have it up on Fantasy Sports Core. It's on Twitter and also on Facebook. So if you missed it, you can always watch it again. Share it with your friends in case they missed it and they have some questions or want some answers. Ladies and gentlemen, the Injured List podcast with our special guest, Mr. Andrew Leduc. Thank you guys for joining us. Peace. We out.